Chapter 1. The Last Normal Day. I remember the last day of my old life with a clarity that haunts me still. It was June 2nd, 1984, a Saturday filled with sunshine and the sort of gentle breeze that promised summer was just around the corner. We lived in a modest house on the edge of Maplewood, New Jersey, the kind with a small backyard and a white picket fence that needed repainting. It was not a house of great architectural beauty, but it was home. The morning began, as usual, with the smell of coffee brewing and the distant sounds of cartoons which my children, Ellie and Max, watched religiously each morning. The scent of toast burning slightly, as it often did when Anne got distracted by a phone call from her sister, filled the kitchen. I remember smiling as I scraped the blackened edges over the sink, watching the birds peck at seeds in the feeder outside the window. "Mike, can you take the kids out for a bit today?" Anne had asked, her voice half muffled by the receiver pressed against her shoulder. "I need to sort out the attic, and those two will just make a mess if they're around." "Sure thing," I replied, flipping the now somewhat salvageable toast onto a plate. "How about we go to the park? Grab some ice cream?" Max's cheer from the living room and Ellie's enthusiastic agreement from where she sat at the kitchen table settled it. The day was set for simple pleasures. The park was alive with the sounds of children's laughter and the occasional bark of dogs chasing frisbees. I pushed Ellie on the swings, her light brown hair flying back with each push, her laughter ringing out like music. Max, ever the adventurer, climbed the jungle gym with the fearless abandon of a child who had yet to learn the harshness of gravity. Sitting on a nearby bench, I watched them, a contentment settling over me that was as warm as the sunlight dappling through the trees. This was life, I thought. This was what mattered. We had ice cream from the cart that always parked by the park's west gate. Ellie chose chocolate, Max went for strawberry, and I had my usual vanilla. We sat on the grass, the three of us, our legs stretched out, ice cream dripping down our hands, sticky and sweet. I remember thinking, remember this, remember how perfect it all is. We returned home in the late afternoon, the kids tired but happy, their faces flushed from the sun. Anne had managed to clear out much of the attic, her brow furrowed in concentration as she sorted through boxes of what she called memories and junk. Dinner was a simple affair of spaghetti and meatballs, Anne's speciality, with garlic bread that Ellie loved to help make. We ate together, talking about our day, about school, about the upcoming summer vacation we had planned to the shore. The night wound down with the usual bedtime routine. I read Max his favorite book, Where the Wild Things Are, doing all the voices and growling just to hear him giggle. Ellie, trying so hard to stay awake to listen, eventually succumbed to sleep midway through. Anne and I ended the day as we often did, curled up on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder, watching a movie we'd seen a dozen times before. I felt her breathing slow and steady, the weight of her head comforting against me. When we finally went to bed, I fell asleep quickly, the events of the day a pleasant hum in my thoughts. There was no warning, no sense of foreboding to suggest that anything was amiss. It was just another day. Yet I awoke the next morning to a life unrecognizable, my own existence as I knew it, slipping through my fingers like grains of sand lost to the wind. But that day, that last normal day, remains a beacon, a reminder of everything that once was and everything that abruptly ceased to be. Chapter 2, A Stranger in Myself. On the morning of June 3rd, 1984, I awoke to a world wholly unfamiliar, the soft light of dawn spilling into a room I had never seen. The sheets were rougher than those I was used to, and the sounds, a city's morning bustle, were too loud, too close. Panic seized me immediately, my breath quick and shallow, as I stared at the ceiling, a cracked expanse of plaster I knew wasn't mine. Sitting up with a start, the first thing I saw through the haze of my confusion was a mirror positioned directly across the small, cluttered room. The reflection that gazed back at me was not my own. Dark, curly hair framed a young face with sharp, unfamiliar features, and deep brown eyes filled with the same shock that coursed through me. I stumbled to the mirror, my movements awkward, uncoordinated with the unfamiliarity of this new body. A wallet lay open on a dresser cluttered with various personal items, and I rifled through it, hands trembling. The ID card showed a name, Alessandro Rossi, and an address in Rome. Rome. The reality of my situation began to sink in, the weight of it almost too much to bear. I was not only inhabiting a stranger's body, but I was halfway across the world from my home in New Jersey. The language, Italian, flowed from my lips effortlessly when I tried to speak, my mind somehow understanding and responding in a way that felt both alien and natural. It was disorienting, realizing I could comprehend and interact in a language that, until that moment, had been foreign to me. Forcing myself to move, I explored the small apartment, each step heavy with the surreal nature of my predicament. Photographs on the walls, books on the shelves, clothes in the wardrobe, they all told stories of a life that was not mine. Every detail felt like an invasion of privacy, yet I was trapped, a prisoner within another person's existence. The streets of Rome greeted me with their chaotic beauty. People rushed past, their conversations a melody of intonations and gestures I understood but felt distant from. I wandered aimlessly, the historic city's architecture a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. Each interaction, from buying a simple coffee to asking for directions, reminded me of the bizarre reality I was now part of. I was Alessandro, but beneath the veneer, I was desperately clinging to Michael. As the day wore on, the gravity of my situation began to fully dawn on me. I couldn't go home. I didn't even know how to start. My family, my job, my very identity. They were all out of reach. The isolation was overwhelming, the loneliness a palpable, suffocating force that followed me as I moved through the day's motions. That night, I lay in a bed that wasn't mine, in a body that felt like a poorly tailored suit, and a dread settled over me. Was this my life now? Would I wake up tomorrow as Alessandro again, or as someone new? Fear of the unknown kept me awake long into the night. Every sound and shadow in the room a reminder of how far I was from everything I knew and loved. When sleep finally claimed me, it was fitful, haunted by dreams of my family searching for me, calling my name through a thick, impenetrable fog. And when dawn light once again crept through unfamiliar curtains, it brought no comfort, only the harrowing realization that my journey through the unknown had only just begun. Chapter 3: Disbelief and Desperation. June 4th, 1984 began with the disorienting sensation of weightlessness and a gentle rocking that did not belong to any memory of mine. As consciousness seeped in, so too did the realization that I was no longer Alessandro Rossi. Instead, I awoke in a small cabin on a ship, the smell of the sea pervasive, the sound of waves against the hull, a steady, rhythmic lullaby that contrasted sharply with the storm of emotions inside me. The body I inhabited now was older, the skin on my hands rough and weathered, the joints aching subtly with each movement. Sitting up, I found myself peering into a compact space filled with nautical charts and aged photographs pinned around a modest desk. A quick, glance in the small, clouded mirror on the wall revealed a face lined with time, eyes like deep sea, calm and fathomless. The ID on the nightstand introduced me as Henrik Larsen, a Danish name, and the ship's logbook confirmed my fears. I was somewhere in the North Atlantic. This new identity brought with it an overwhelming sense of isolation. The vast ocean around me, a physical representation of my internal exile. As I explored the confines of the ship, interacting with a crew that knew Henrik well but were strangers to me, the surreal nature of my predicament took a firmer hold. They spoke to me with familiarity, asking about navigation charts and weather predictions, each question a sharp poke to the reality that I was not who they thought I was. By midday, the pressure of pretense became too much. I cornered a young crew member, Jonas, who had always greeted Henrik with a bright smile. In the privacy of the ship's small mess hall, I attempted to explain my situation. My voice sounded alien, even to my own ears, as I described waking up each day in a new body, far from my family, far from the life I knew. Jonas's face, initially open and concerned, slowly closed off as I spoke. The smile faded, replaced by a furrow of confusion and then a clear edge of disbelief. "You need rest, Henrik," he said finally, the informal tone gone, replaced by something colder, more formal. "The sea can play tricks on the mind. A good night's sleep, and you'll be feeling like yourself." The conversation ended there. Jonas's quick exit, a clear dismissal. I was left alone, my confession hanging heavy in the air, as unbelievable to him as the reality I was living. His reaction was a bitter pill, the first of what I suspected would be many. The realization sank in that explaining my truth wasn't just difficult, it was likely impossible. Who could believe such a fantastical tale? The rest of the day passed in a blur of mechanical interactions. I performed Henrik's duties as best I could, guided by the crew's expectations and the muscle memory of the body I inhabited. But inside, I was reeling, grappling not only with the logistical nightmare of my situation, but also with the emotional toll it exacted. That night, as I lay in Henrik's bunk, the ship rocking gently on the waves, I faced a new wave of realization about the depth of my plight. Not only was I trapped in this cycle of waking up in a new life each day, but I was also utterly alone in it. The impossibility of my experience, the sheer outlandishness of it, meant that finding help or even a willing ear was a far greater challenge than I had anticipated. As sleep once again took me, a part of me feared what the next day would bring, where I would wake up and how much further from home I would find myself. But another part, a growing part, was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about enduring. It was about adapting, about finding strength even in the most bizarre and lonely circumstances. Chapter 4: Lost Words and Sleepless Nights. June 5th, 1984, brought another disorienting morning, but this one was starkly different. I awoke in a cramped, hot room, the sound of bustling city life immediately invasive. The air was thick with the smell of spices and exhaust fumes, a tapestry of sounds and smells that was both overwhelming and alien. As I sat up, I found myself in a small bed, a ceiling fan laboriously turning above, doing little to alleviate the heat. Looking around, I quickly realized I was in Mumbai, India, another continent, another life. The person I was now, according to the few documents in the room, was a man named Arjun Patel. His room was adorned with family photos, vibrant fabrics, and various religious icons that reflected a life deeply embedded in its culture and community. The homesickness hit me like a wave. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a deep, aching longing to hear my family's voices, to connect with something, anything familiar. Desperation drove me out into the bustling streets to a payphone I had spotted from a rickety balcony. Fumbling with unfamiliar coins and the payphone's worn buttons, I managed to dial the international number to my home in New Jersey. The phone rang, and for a few eternal seconds, I held my breath, praying for a connection to the world I had lost. Hello? The voice that answered was unmistakably Anne's, but she sounded distant, not just in miles, but in reality. It's me, Anne. It's Michael. I blurted out in Hindi, forgetting in my desperation that she would not understand. Who is this? Why are you speaking? What do you want? Confusion laced her voice, the strain of my supposed disappearance evident in her tone. Anne, please, it's me, Michael. I don't know how, but it's me. I switched to English, but my accent was now heavily Indian, the inflections all wrong, the desperation probably rendering my words incomprehensible. There was a pause, a horrible, stretching silence, then a soft sob, and the line went dead. The phone slipped from my sweaty palm, clattering against the booth. I stood there, heart racing, the noise of Mumbai crashing over me like waves. They couldn't understand. How could they? That night, and for two more, I couldn't sleep. I was too afraid to close my eyes, too afraid of losing even this tenuous connection to who I once was. Instead, I wandered the neon-lit streets of Mumbai, the city that never sleeps, a fitting backdrop for my insomnia-induced odyssey. Driven by a mix of fear and an absurd sliver of hope, I sought out anyone who might offer an explanation. A psychic, a sage, anyone accustomed to the strange and surreal. I visited dimly lit parlors, where incense smoke swirled in the stale air, and the lines of reality seemed blurred enough to permit miracles. But every attempt ended in failure. The psychics found my story ludicrous, a bad joke, or a sign of a mind unhinged by stress. Rest, my friend, and find peace, one elderly psychic told me, her eyes kind yet unmistakably dismissive. By the third day, my body was rebelling against the lack of sleep, my mind frayed at the edges. I found myself in a small park, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, a beauty I could barely appreciate. As I sat on a bench, my eyelids heavy, my head nodded forward, and I slipped into a brief, unintended slumber. It couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but when my head snapped back up, the world had shifted again. I was no longer in Mumbai. I was sitting on a bus, sunlight streaming through windows covered in frost patterns. A cold, clean air replacing the muggy heat of India. I was someone else, somewhere else. The brief connection to Arjun Patel severed as cleanly as the rest. That morning, as I tried to orient myself once more, I realized that fighting the inevitable was futile. Sleep was not just a biological necessity, it was my portal to these new lives, and no amount of resistance would change the rules of this bizarre existence I was trapped in. Chapter 5: Echoes of Home. As dawn broke over yet another foreign landscape, the chill of the unknown crept into my bones with an intimacy that was almost cruel. The days following my failed attempt to reach Anne from Mumbai melded into a monochrome blur of dispassionately performed duties and hollow interactions. Each morning's awakening brought with it not just a new identity, but a deepening chasm of despair, a reminder that with every sunrise, I was drifting further from the life I once cherished. In the silent throes of my isolation, I occupied the lives of others with a robotic precision, maintaining their routines with a detachment that bordered on numbness. I found myself in Sao Paulo, Brazil, as a middle-aged woman named Luisa, managing a small bookstore. Her days were filled with the quiet shuffle of customers and the scent of aging paper, a life marked by its gentle predictability. In Cairo, I became Omar, a young taxi driver whose days were consumed by the cacophony of bustling streets and vibrant market calls. Each life starkly different, yet underpinned by the universal mundanity of human existence. Amidst these shifting backdrops, a part of me began to surrender to the rhythm of this bizarre existence. Yet, this acquiescence was shattered abruptly when I awoke in the familiar surroundings of what seemed to be suburban America. The walls of the small, tidy room were adorned with sports memorabilia and family photos that spoke of a well loved life. As I stumbled to the bathroom, my reflection revealed a middle aged man with worry lines that seemed etched by my own inner turmoil. Elation surged through me, raw and overwhelming, at the realization that I was once again in my home country. The presence of a landline in the living room prompted a reckless surge of hope. I dialed my home number with trembling fingers, each tone a heartbeat, each breath a prayer for connection. Hello? Anne's voice was a balm to my frayed nerves, yet the familiarity of it twisted the knife of my reality. It's Michael, I blurted out, desperation coloring my tone. Anne, it's really me. Please listen. I. The line crackled with her sharp intake of breath. This isn't funny. Whoever you are, this is sick. We're trying to find him. Don't you understand? We're worried sick. Her words were a deluge, washing away the fragile construct of hope I had built. No, Anne, please, I pleaded, the accent of my current host marring my earnest entreaty. It's me. Something incredible has happened. I can't explain over the phone, but stop calling us, she interrupted, her voice breaking under the strain of grief and anger. Please, just stop. The line went dead, the finality of the dial tone echoing like a death knell in the sparse room. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering against the hardwood floor. I slumped against the wall, the weight of her disbelief and the reality of my situation pressing down on me like a physical force. The days that followed were marked by a heavy lethargy. I moved through the motions of my host's life, each task a monumental effort. The faces of his family stared back at me from frames on the mantelpiece, their smiles a stark contrast to the sorrow that had settled in my heart. As night fell, I lay awake in the darkness, the echoes of Anne's last words haunting the edges of my thoughts. The enormity of my reality was suffocating, each breath a reminder of the infinite distance between my present and my past. The loneliness was no longer an abstract concept, but a living, breathing entity that occupied the room, filling every corner with its oppressive presence. Sleep, when it finally claimed me, was fitful and fraught with nightmares of an endless search through shifting faces and landscapes, always chasing, never reaching. I awoke with a start, the first light of dawn doing nothing to dispel the darkness that had settled over my spirit. The realization that I might never go home again, that I might never see Anne or my children, was a bitter pill that lodged itself firmly in my throat. I was lost, adrift in a sea of borrowed lives with no shore in sight. Chapter 6: Denial and Disbelief. When I awoke on the morning of June 8th, 1984, it was to the blinding light of an unfamiliar sun and the disorienting clamor of a bustling marketplace somewhere in the heart of Marrakech. The body I inhabited was strong and youthful, the air filled with the scent of spices and the cacophony of vendors hawking their wares. But even the vibrant life of the market couldn't penetrate the fog of denial that had begun to cloud my mind. No, this couldn't be real. It was absurd, impossible. These weren't lives I was living. They were too fantastical, too disjointed. This had to be a dream, a prolonged, vivid nightmare from which I would eventually wake. I just needed to find the right way to rouse myself, to snap back to reality where my family, my home, my job, all the anchors of my actual life still existed. The mental spiral had begun the previous night after the call with Anne. Her words, accusing me of cruelty, had cut deeper than I wanted to admit. They echoed in my mind, fueling a burgeoning sense of unreality. How could my loving wife believe I was capable of such deception? How could my touchstones of reality believe I was gone? Determined to prove to myself that none of this was real, I spent the next few days attempting to wake up from the dream. In Marrakesh, as a young merchant named Idris, I tried shaking myself awake, splashing cold water on my face, pinching my skin until it bruised. But morning after morning, I woke up in a new body, in a new city. I was an elderly librarian in Stockholm, her joints aching with arthritis, her days marked by the quiet solitude of dusty books. I was a street performer in Rio de Janeiro, agile and lively, drawing crowds with vibrant capoeira moves. Each life was vivid in detail, rich in emotions and experiences that I couldn't have imagined on my own. Yet, I refused to accept them as anything more than fabrications of my subconscious. No, this isn't real, I muttered to myself as I lay in a sparse apartment in Rio, the sounds of the city's nightlife a dull roar in the background. You're going to wake up, Michael. You have to wake up. The cycle of denial only deepened my isolation. Interactions with those around me became strained, my responses automatic, my presence distant. I was there physically, but mentally I was walled off, consumed by my refusal to engage with these lives that weren't mine. With each passing day, my desperation grew. I started seeking out more drastic measures, anything that could potentially shock me awake. I spun wild theories, each more improbable than the last. Maybe if I could induce extreme physical pain, or perhaps if I experienced intense emotional shock, I would finally open my eyes to my old bedroom, my wife sleeping peacefully beside me. By the end of the week, as I walked the moonlit streets of Rio, a new plan began to form, a plan so drastic it was born purely out of the depths of my denial. If nothing within these lives could wake me, then perhaps the shock of ending one might. The thought was terrifying, yet it carried a weight of inevitability. As I lay down that night, the echoes of samba music drifting through the streets below, I prepared myself for what was to come. Tomorrow, I resolved, I would do something irreversible, something that would surely awaken me from this nightmare. But as sleep claimed me, deep and devoid of dreams, I was oblivious to the relentless march of time and fate. I did not know then that no matter how hard I tried to deny it, the reality of my situation was unyielding. Tomorrow would come, and with it, another life, another day of existence in a world that was relentlessly, painfully real. Chapter 7. The Inescapable Truth. In the depth of the night, somewhere in a sprawling European capital, I awoke to the unsettling realization that the body I inhabited was not my own. It was becoming a familiar sensation, this waking into a life not mine, but never had it felt so jarring. As I stumbled out of bed and glanced around the luxurious apartment, evidence of influence and power adorned the walls and shelves, accolades, certificates, and photos with figures I recognized from international news. In the bathroom, the face in the mirror was that of a man known to the world, a prominent politician whose influence reached far and wide. Panic set in, not just at the unfamiliarity, but at the understanding that this was no ordinary day, and I was no ordinary person in this sequence of lives I had been thrust into. Despite this, a singular, desperate plan formed in my mind, one driven by the futile hope that ending this day could end the cycle. Determined to escape what I believed was a relentless nightmare, I found myself on a quiet street that early morning, walking with purpose toward the central train station. The city was just beginning to stir, the sky tinged with the first light of dawn. The station was busy with commuters, none of whom paid any heed to the man quietly unraveling amidst them. I waited, heart pounding with a mix of dread and an irrational spark of hope. The train approached, its usual arrival transformed in my mind into a potential release from this bewildering existence. I moved without thinking, without considering the world beyond my immediate anguish. The next thing I knew, sunlight was filtering through curtains in a modest bedroom in another part of the world. Disoriented, I sat up, my mind struggling to piece together the fragmented memories of moments before. A sense of relief washed over me briefly, relief that I had escaped the physical consequences of my actions. But as I turned on the television to distract myself from the residual panic, the relief shattered. The news report was grim. A prominent politician had tragically lost his life. The footage was discreet, respectful, yet the implications were clear. Viewer discretion advised, they warned as they discussed the impact of his sudden departure on the political landscape and his personal circle. There it was, in stark, unavoidable clarity. My actions had consequences that stretched far beyond my own experience. The realization hit me like a physical blow. These lives I entered were not just figments of a prolonged dream. They were real, with histories and futures I had no right to disrupt. The grief and responsibility of it overwhelmed me. I had not only failed to escape this inexplicable reality, but had also left irreversible marks on the lives of others. For the rest of the day, I moved like a ghost through the life of the person I had become, a school teacher in a small Canadian town. The normalcy of this life, the staff meetings, the lesson plans felt absurdly out of sync with the turmoil inside me. I was a puppet going through the motions, my thoughts haunted by the faces of those the politician had left behind. That night, as I lay in bed in yet another unfamiliar room, the weight of my existence pressed down on me. Sleep was elusive, each moment of near rest punctuated by the sharp sting of guilt and the heavy burden of understanding. I was not just a victim of these circumstances. I was an unwilling participant impacting lives in ways I couldn't even begin to amend. The harsh truth was undeniable now. There was no waking up from this. There was no easy escape. Each life I touched was real, and each decision I made carried weight. The cycle I was caught in was relentless, but it was not without consequence. The lives I lived were not mine to end, and the pain I felt could not compare to the ripple effects of my actions. As dawn crept into the room, painting the walls with light, I knew that the days ahead would be different. I could no longer afford the luxury of denial or the hope of escape through oblivion. I had to find another way to cope, to understand, and perhaps to make right what could still be mended. Chapter 8: Desperation and Resolve. The days following my ill-fated attempt to end the relentless cycle were marked by a profound disillusionment. Each morning, I awoke with a residual fear, a deep-seated terror that any action I might take could have irreversible consequences for another innocent life. Thus, I found myself drifting through each day, performing tasks mechanically, engaging with people minimally, and avoiding any decisions that might ripple beyond my temporary existence in these borrowed bodies. This period of passive existence included a particularly disorienting morning when I awoke with a startling lack of coordination and an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. It took me a few moments in the muted light of a softly decorated nursery to realize I had woken up in the body of an infant. My limbs were unresponsive to my desires for movement, and my attempts to speak produced nothing more than gurgles. The panic that ensued was palpable, a visceral fear that I might be trapped indefinitely in this helpless state. Thankfully, the inherent need for sleep in such a young body soon took over, and within a few hours, I was plunged into darkness, waking next in the body of an elderly man in a quiet, sunlit garden. Eventually, the urge to connect with my family, to hear a familiar voice that might anchor me to my former reality, overpowered my apprehension. I found myself in the body of a middle aged woman in Chicago, her apartment filled with the normalcy of urban life, a stark contrast to the turmoil within me. With trembling hands, I dialed my home number, each tone echoing like a drumbeat in my ears. The voice that answered was not Anne's, but my son's, Max. Hello? Max, it's Dad, I said, the words rushing out in a desperate whisper, my current host's Midwestern accent coloring my speech. There was a pause, a heavy, laden silence before he responded. His voice was cold, tinged with a bitterness that cut deeper than the sharp Chicago wind outside. Stop this, okay? Just stop. Whoever you are, this isn't funny. You're sick, messing with us like this while we're trying to find him. No, Max, please, it's really me. I'm trapped somehow. It's hard to explain, but it's really me. I don't want to hear this. Don't call again. Just don't. The line went dead, the finality of the disconnection echoing in the stark apartment. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering against the countertop. Max's words, his anger and hurt, were a blow from which I couldn't easily recover. For a moment, I stood there, numb. The sounds of the city life around me muffled, as if underwater. But then, something shifted within me, a fiery blend of anger and determination. No, I refused to accept this as my reality. I could not and would not let this be the end of my story. If rationality and caution had led to nothing but pain and confusion, then perhaps irrationality and boldness were the answer. I resolved then to push through this bizarre existence, to cycle through these lives as quickly as necessary until I found myself close enough to home to make a difference, to show my face, to prove the truth of my identity. It was a desperate plan, born from desperation itself, but it galvanized me with a purpose I hadn't felt since this nightmare began. Over the next few days, I moved with a new urgency, seeking out opportunities to sleep, to shift, to force the transitions from one life to another. From a barista in Seattle to a taxi driver in New York, I pushed the limits of each borrowed body's endurance, each shift bringing me potentially closer to my goal. The plan was fraught with uncertainty, every transition a leap into the unknown, but it was a chance I was willing to take. It was better to act, to attempt to regain control, than to remain a passive prisoner of this inexplicable fate. As the sun set on a day spent in the life of a park ranger in Montana, I prepared myself for another shift, another roll of the dice in the gamble of my existence. With each closing of my eyes, I hoped for a dawn that brought me closer to home, to a resolution, to an end, to the uncertainty that haunted my every waking moment. Chapter 9. An Ill-Fated Homecoming. After weeks of relentless cycling through lives, desperately trying to edge closer to anything familiar, fate finally dealt me a hand that felt like a tangible thread of hope. I awoke on a chilly morning under an overpass in Manhattan, the harsh sounds of the city in its relentless motion echoing around me. The body I inhabited this time was frail and worn, the clothes threadbare, a stark reminder of the harsh realities many face. Yet, despite the apparent hardships of this life, I felt a surge of exhilaration. I was back in New York within reach of my old life, my family. The streets of Manhattan in the late 80s were vibrant and tumultuous, a cacophony of colors, sounds, and movements. It took me the better part of the day begging for subway fare and navigating the labyrinthine transit system to make my way to the familiar suburbs of New Jersey. Each step was fueled by a mix of dread and anticipation. Today could be the day I could finally prove my reality, reclaim my life. As the suburban landscape grew more familiar, each landmark a piercing stab of nostalgia, my pace quickened until I stood, breathless and disheveled, in front of the house I once called home. It looked unchanged, the exterior as welcoming as ever, but the windows held no warmth for me now. They were just glass barriers separating me from the life I had lost. With a heart pounding against the fragile rib cage of my temporary body, I waited in the shadows of the nearby trees as the afternoon faded into evening. One by one, Anne, Max, and Ellie returned home, but they were not alone. Dressed in somber black, they were accompanied by friends and family, their faces etched with grief. It was only then, as I watched them gather, that the bitter truth sank in. It was the day of my own memorial service. As the last of the guests departed and the night stretched on, I approached the house, my steps uncertain. The door opened to reveal Anne, her face a mask of sorrow and fatigue. My appearance, a disheveled and desperate stranger, only drew a gasp of fear. Anne, it's me, Michael, I pleaded, stepping forward, my voice cracking under the strain of emotions. Please, you have to believe me. I've been trying to get back. Who are you? Anne's voice was sharp, a defensive edge cutting through the air. Max, call the police. No, wait. I reached out, but it was too late. Max, larger and more imposing than I remembered, stepped between us, his stance protective. The police arrived swiftly, and despite my protests, my explanations, my pleas, I was handcuffed and taken away. The ride to the station was a blur, my mind reeling from the catastrophic failure of my attempts to reconnect, to prove my identity. In a stark cell, under the unforgiving fluorescent lights, I lay on a thin mattress, the cold seeping into my bones. The walls felt closer than ever, not just the physical barriers of my cell, but the walls I had hit at every turn, trying to breach the unbelievable reality of my situation. As I closed my eyes, the faces of my family haunted me. Anne's fear, Max's anger, Ellie's confusion. Sleep, when it came, was a merciful oblivion, a brief respite from the relentless torment. But even in the depths of despair, the cycle continued, indifferent to the human heartache it perpetuated. I awoke not in the cell, but in yet another life, yet another day, leaving behind only the echoes of my presence. A man out of time, out of place, forever lost to those he loved the most. Chapter 10: Echoes and Goodbyes. The weeks following my arrest and the disastrous attempt to reconnect with my family marked a period of profound sorrow and introspection. Each day brought with it a new body, a new life, and a renewed sense of caution. The knowledge that I had left the homeless man to wake in a jail cell, bearing the consequences of my desperate actions, weighed heavily on me. I was becoming painfully aware of the ripples my presence caused in these borrowed lives. In my grief, I withdrew further into myself. My actions throughout these days meticulous and restrained. Whether I found myself as a baker in a sleepy French village or a librarian in bustling Sao Paulo, I strove to maintain the equilibrium of my hosts' lives, touching nothing I could not put right, altering nothing that might cause harm. I was a ghost, performing tasks mechanically, speaking only when spoken to, a spectator in my own existence. Yet, the desire for connection for a single word from my family remained a gnawing ache at the back of my mind. I resisted as long as I could, but the loneliness was a cavernous void that echoed with the memories of Anne, Max, and Ellie's voices. Eventually, the need to hear them, even if just for a moment, overpowered my restraint. I began making brief, anonymous calls, using the fleeting moments of solitude granted by my temporary lives. Each time I dialed the familiar number, my heart hammered with a mixture of fear and longing. One evening, in the quiet of a dimly lit study in London, where I had awoken as a retired professor, I made another call. The ring, usually a harbinger of connection, now felt like a countdown to inevitable heartache. Hello? The voice that answered was Ellie's. It was softer, tinged with the weariness of someone forced to grow up too quickly. I hesitated, the words I had planned dissolving into nothing. In that brief pause, filled with the heavy breathing of indecision, Ellie's patience snapped. Look, I don't know who you are or why you keep doing this, but you have to stop, she said, her voice cracking with a mixture of anger and sorrow. Mom, Mom couldn't handle it, okay? She's gone. She just couldn't anymore. So please, just stop calling. Stop torturing us. The phone slipped from my trembling hand, clattering against the wood of the desk. Ellie's words, "She's gone," echoed in the room, each syllable a hammer blow to my already fractured spirit. Anne, overcome with grief, no longer in the picture. Her absence a void even more profound than the one I felt within myself. In that moment, the full weight of the consequences of my journey hit me. My attempts to connect, to prove my existence, had only inflicted more pain. The realization was a cruel twist. The acknowledgement that in trying to hold on to my family, I had pushed them further into despair. The weeks that followed were a blur of grief and guilt. I moved through the motions of life, each day blending into the next, each night a battle against the memories that haunted me. The brief calls stopped. I could no longer bear to hear the strain in my children's voices, could no longer justify the intrusion into their mourning. As I lay in a stranger's bed one restless night, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, I understood that my journey was no longer about finding a way back. It was about learning how to move forward, how to live with the guilt and the grief. The harsh lessons of my reality had taught me that some distances cannot be bridged, some fractures cannot be mended. Sleep, when it came, was a reluctant ally, pulling me into the next day, into another life, another chance to perhaps make amends, even in the smallest of ways. But the echo of Ellie's parting words lingered, a somber reminder of everything lost and the fragile hope of redemption that lay in the days ahead. Chapter 11. What am I? In the weeks following Ellie's heart-wrenching admonition, I found myself drifting through lives with a sense of detachment that bordered on existential. Each morning brought with it a new face, a new set of circumstances, and a new existential crisis. As I floated from one life to another, the question that began to gnaw at the edges of my consciousness was not about when or how this might end, but a much deeper, more fundamental query. What am I? This question first surfaced on a rainy morning in Amsterdam. I had woken up as a middle-aged woman named Clara, an artist living alone in a studio apartment cluttered with half-finished canvases and dried paint tubes. As I sat at her easel, brush in hand, attempting to continue a landscape painting that seemed to echo my turbulent thoughts, the question seeped into my mind. What does it mean to be I? The I that was Michael felt distant, like a character in a story I once knew well, but now only recalled fragments of. With each passing day, the continuity of Michael faded, supplanted by countless others, each with their own hopes, dreams, and routines. If I am not my body, as has been made abundantly clear by my experiences, then what constitutes my essence? Is I a collection of memories, a series of actions, or something more intangible? As Clara, I pondered over her paintings, each stroke a testament to her identity. Could it be that I am like this artwork? A mere expression of moments and feelings, constantly evolving, never complete? The thought was both liberating and terrifying. Liberating because it suggested a fluidity to existence that transcended physical form. Terrifying because it implied a lack of any true anchor, a core that could be called self. This philosophical inquiry deepened as I slipped into the lives of others. In Tokyo, I became Kenji, a young businessman whose life was defined by his dedication to his career. Here, surrounded by the stark lines of his minimalist apartment, I contemplated whether I am defined by my purpose, the roles I play. Kenji's life was a stark contrast to Clara's, yet both were expressions of identities shaped by their passions and pursuits. Was I, then, merely a reflection of what I do, a shadow cast by my actions? Weeks turned into months, and with each transition, I delved deeper into these existential musings. I found myself in a small town in Egypt as Amina, a schoolteacher passionately devoted to her students. Through her, I explored the idea that perhaps I am a vessel of impact, defined by the influence I have on others. But this notion, too, was fleeting, dissolving into the sands of the Sahara as I moved on. With each life, the philosophical puzzle of my existence grew more complex. The boundaries of selfhood, so clearly delineated in my former life as Michael, now blurred into a mosaic of experiences and reflections. What am I, if not the body I inhabit, not the memories I hold, not the impact I make? This question haunted me, a constant refrain amid the cacophony of lives I lived. It became a quest not for a way back to my old life, but for understanding the very nature of existence itself. As I lay in a hammock in a Brazilian village, gazing up at a starlit sky, the question lingered in the air like the faint notes of a distant melody. What am I? The answer was elusive, as intangible as the breeze that whispered through the trees. But the pursuit of that answer, the deep dive into the essence of being, offered a new way to navigate the labyrinth of lives I found myself traversing. Perhaps, I mused, the journey to understand I was the very core of this odyssey, a path not just marked by questions, but fundamentally shaped by them. Chapter 12: Recognition and Revelation. It was a crisp morning when I awoke in yet another unfamiliar bed, the sunlight filtering through curtains I did not recognize. The body I inhabited felt middle-aged, fit and strong, yet carrying the subtle weight of years. As I was still orienting myself to this new existence, the bedroom door opened and a woman walked in. She was likely in her early 40s, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, her expression one of habitual familiarity. But as her eyes met mine, a flicker of confusion passed over her features. "Good morning," I ventured, the greeting automatic, my voice carrying the depth and timbre of the man I was for the day. She paused, studying me closely, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Who are you?" she asked bluntly, her tone a mixture of curiosity and caution. I was taken aback, unused to being directly confronted. "I'm sorry. What do you mean? You look like my husband? You sound like my husband, but you are not my husband. Who are you? Are you some sort of demon?" Her voice was a mix of jest and genuine suspicion, her stance defensive yet intrigued. "No, nothing like that," I said quickly, the absurdity of the situation momentarily lifting the heaviness I had felt for weeks. It's hard to explain. I'm just a normal person. Or I was. I don't know exactly how to tell you this, but I wake up in different lives every day. Today, I woke up here as him. Her initial wariness gave way to a profound interest. "Tell me more," she urged, pulling a chair to the bedside. "Explain everything." So I did. I told her about the first morning I woke up in a different body, about the subsequent days of confusion and despair, the calls to my family, the missteps, and the realizations. I spoke of my wife Anne, my children, Max and Ellie, and the life I feared I had lost forever. As the hours passed, we talked extensively about the existential crises I had faced, my grappling with the very essence of identity and existence. She listened intently, her eyes never leaving mine, as if trying to piece together the reality of my words through the emotions they stirred. "You have an incredible opportunity," she said, after a long pause, her voice thoughtful. "You see the world through countless eyes. You experience lives as intimately as anyone can without truly living them. Maybe, just maybe, you're meant to do more than just pass through these lives." Her words struck a chord deep within me. "Do more?" I echoed, the concept slowly taking shape. "Yes, think about it," she continued, her enthusiasm growing. "Each day, you could try to leave something positive behind. Use what you know, what you've learned from all these people to make a small part of the world better. Isn't that a rare gift? A chance to truly impact lives across the spectrum of human experience?" The idea was overwhelming, transformative. It shifted something fundamental in my perspective. All this time, I had been mourning the loss of my life, viewing my situation as a curse, an endless cycle of grief and loss. But here was a viewpoint I hadn't considered. What if this curse was also a unique opportunity? What if I could be a force for good, an agent of subtle change and positivity? As the day waned, our conversation never faltered. We discussed ethics, philosophy, the butterfly effect of small good deeds. By the time I felt the familiar tug of sleep pulling at my consciousness, I was reluctant to let go of this life, this connection that had sparked a new fire within me. But the cycle would not wait, and as I drifted off, her words echoed in my mind, a mantra of potential and purpose. I was more than a displaced traveler. I could be a bearer of light in the mundane, a whisper of kindness in the cacophony of the everyday. When I awoke in a new life the next morning, for the first time in many weeks, I felt a flicker of hope, a sense of mission. The weight of existence felt different, not lighter, but imbued with a new gravity, an opportunity to make a difference, one life at a time. Chapter 13. A small act of kindness. As dawn broke over a serene lakeside town, I awoke in the body of an elderly gardener named Harold. The early morning light filtered through gauzy curtains, casting a warm glow on the neatly arranged tools and stacks of gardening books that filled the small, cozy cottage. My first conscious breaths drew in the earthy scent of damp soil and fresh foliage from the open window. It was a promising start to a new day. With the previous day's conversation still resonant in my mind, I was determined to make a positive impact, however small. As I rose and prepared for the day, I felt an energizing sense of purpose. Today wouldn't just be about maintaining Harold's routine, it would be about enhancing it, about leaving this segment of life better than I found it. Harold's schedule, noted on a calendar in the kitchen, included tending to the community garden. As I walked the path to the garden, the morning sun warming my back, I pondered what improvement I could make. Harold was evidently well loved, judging by the friendly waves and cheerful greetings from neighbors. His contribution to the community was already significant, but there had to be something additional, something meaningful I could do. Upon reaching the garden, I noticed a corner that had been neglected, overgrown with weeds and debris. It struck me as the perfect opportunity for improvement. Throughout the morning, I worked diligently, clearing the area, revitalizing the soil, and planting a variety of flowers I knew from Harold's books would bloom vibrantly and attract pollinators. The physical work was taxing but satisfying, and with each shovelful of earth, I felt a growing connection to Harold's world. However, as the day progressed, a nagging worry crept into my thoughts. What if this change was unwelcome? What if the plants I chose negatively affected the garden's existing ecosystem? The potential for unintended consequences, the so-called butterfly effect, weighed on me. My intention was to do good, but the complexity of human lives meant that even well-intentioned actions could lead to unforeseen outcomes. These doubts were still swirling in my head as I put away the gardening tools at the end of the day. Returning to Harold's home, I was quietly apprehensive, unsure if I had overstepped unseen boundaries. My concerns began to dissipate later that evening. As Harold, I attended a small community gathering, a regular occurrence I found noted in his calendar. The locals, a tight knit group of fellow gardeners and friends, were buzzing with excitement over the newly cleared and planted corner of the garden. Harold, the new flower bed is a wonderful addition, exclaimed one of the neighbors, her eyes twinkling with genuine appreciation. It's going to be beautiful, and the bees will surely love it come spring. Others echoed her sentiments, their warm words and smiles washing over me like a balm. Any remaining worry I harbored melted away in the face of their sincere gratitude. It was clear that this small act had been a positive change, one that harmonized with the community's values and enhanced their shared space. That night, as I lay in Harold's bed, a gentle exhaustion cloaked my limbs. But my heart was lighter than it had been in weeks. For the first time since this journey began, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could make a difference. The positive feedback from the community was a small affirmation that not all was lost. There was potential for good, potential for meaningful interactions that transcended the boundaries of my bizarre existence. As sleep claimed me, pulling me toward another unknown dawn, I resolved to carry this newfound optimism into whatever life awaited me next. The journey was far from over, but now I carried a seed of purpose, ready to sprout in the soil of whatever life I found myself in next. Chapter 14: A Lesson in Limits. Riding the wave of success from my modest contribution to Harold's community garden, I woke up the next day filled with a renewed sense of purpose and a desire to enact more significant change. The sun was just peeking over the horizon when I found myself in the body of a young school teacher in a bustling urban neighborhood. Her apartment was small but cozy, adorned with motivational posters and stacks of student essays. As I sifted through her planner and class notes, a plan began to take shape in my mind, a plan to make a lasting impact in her life and, by extension, the lives of her students. Energized by this new mission, I headed to the school, a worn brick building that buzzed with the chaotic energy of youth. Today, I decided I would implement a new project, something bold and innovative that could potentially transform the educational experience for these kids. The idea was to introduce a creative writing program centered around storytelling and personal expression, something far removed from the rigid curriculum. The morning passed in a blur as I pitched the idea to the principal and rallied the other teachers for support. Their hesitant enthusiasm bolstered my resolve, and by lunchtime, I was outlining the project to a classroom full of curious students. The initial response was promising. Eyes lit up, and ideas flowed freely, a reaction that seemed to validate my approach. However, as the day progressed, the complexities of implementing such a program without proper planning began to surface. Resources were limited. Some students struggled with the open ended nature of the assignments, and the disruption to the regular schedule caused confusion and frustration among other staff members. By the end of the school day, the principal approached me with a furrowed brow. "I appreciate your enthusiasm," she said in a tone that was both kind and firm, "but perhaps we moved too quickly. We need to think about how changes affect everyone, not just in the short term, but in the long run, too." Her words struck a chord. In my eagerness to make a significant impact, I had overlooked the practical aspects and the broader implications of my actions. The school was a complex ecosystem, and my well intentioned disruption had ripple effects I hadn't fully anticipated. That evening, as I sat in the teacher's modest living room reflecting on the day's events, the reality of my situation settled in more deeply. My role in these lives wasn't to enact sweeping changes or to reimagine their trajectories on a whim. Rather, it was to add small, positive touches to enhance, not overturn, the lives I briefly inhabited. The disappointment of the day's setbacks was palpable, but it was also instructive. I realized that while my intentions were good, the execution and the impact of my actions needed careful consideration. The balance between doing good and respecting the existing order of someone's life was delicate, and I was still learning to navigate it. As I prepared for bed, the day's lessons firmly etched in my mind, I felt a quiet resolve wash over me. Tomorrow and in the days to come, I would focus on smaller, more manageable acts of kindness and improvement. I would aim to leave these lives a little better than I found them, but always with a mindful respect for the natural flow of their individual stories. As sleep claimed me, I drifted off with a clearer understanding of my purpose in this strange new existence. Each day was an opportunity, not for grand gestures, but for subtle, meaningful enhancements. A smile here, a helpful hand there, a kind word when needed. That, I realized, was the true essence of the positive impact I could hope to achieve. Chapter 15. A Tapestry of Lives. As I awoke to the light of a new dawn, the familiar disorientation of finding myself in another life was accompanied by a profound sense of peace. Over the weeks and months of countless awakenings, countless lives, I had wrestled with despair, denial, and the daunting reality of my existence. But now, as I lay in the quiet stillness of an early morning, I felt a deep, resonant acceptance of my journey and the role I had come to embrace. Today, I found myself as Lena, a community nurse in a small coastal town, her life dedicated to caring for others. It was fitting, somehow, that I should awaken here in a life marked by service on the day I fully accepted my own purpose. As I moved through Lena's morning routines, preparing her medical bag, reviewing her schedule of visits, I reflected on the profound lessons each life had taught me. I had come to understand that I is not just a singular identity confined to one body, one set of experiences. I is a multitude, a collective of experiences and perspectives. In each life I touched, I added a strand to the ever growing tapestry of existence, each thread colored with its own unique hue, contributing to a larger, more beautiful picture. Today, as Lena, I would make small differences. A comforting word to an elderly patient struggling with loneliness, careful attention to the needs of a young mother, a shared laugh with a man fighting a hard battle against illness. These were not grand gestures, but quiet, meaningful moments that, in their own way, stitched positivity and light into the fabric of daily life. As the day unfolded, I carried with me not just Lena's professional dedication, but also a personal commitment to leave behind a sprinkle of joy, a dash of hope. And with each interaction, I saw how even the smallest act of kindness could light up a face, how a moment of compassion could ease a burden, how a simple presence could break the solitude that weighed on so many. That evening, sitting quietly on a bench overlooking the sea, I allowed myself a moment to ponder the philosophical questions that had once tormented me. What am I? The answer seemed clearer now. I am a custodian of moments, a bearer of fleeting yet significant sparks of humanity. I am both a witness and a participant in the vast, intricate dance of life. I had become we, and in that transformation, I found not just solace, but a mission. Each day granted me the privilege to influence, to mend, even if just a little, the fabric of these lives. And though I might never stay long enough to see the long term effects, I trusted in the ripple effect of goodwill, in the enduring power of shared kindness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with strokes of orange and pink, I felt an overwhelming connection to every life I had lived, every soul I had encountered. The beauty of my unique journey lay not in the destinations, each day's awakening, but in the journey itself, the myriad encounters, the shared human condition. I no longer looked for a way back to what was. Instead, I embraced the path forward, the endless opportunities each new day presented to sow seeds of positivity. My existence, once a source of profound distress, had become a canvas of potential, a chance to enrich, to beautify, to understand, and to be understood. As night fell and the stars began to twinkle in the vast velvet sky, I closed my eyes, ready for the next day, the next life. Wherever I would wake, whoever I would be, I held on to the certainty that I could make a difference, one small, incremental change at a time. In this realization, I found not just acceptance, but joy in my extraordinary existence. The endless weave of lives, each one an essential thread in the grand, ongoing tapestry of humanity.